Hello, welcome. This video is a video with a few more musings on the last video that I made about Kierkegaard in an excerpt from his book The Lily of the Field and the Bird of the Air. I've been thinking about it since the last video, and it deserves a little bit more discussion, I think, because it's not an easy subject which I'm trying to discuss. It's not something that can be got at, in a lecture or seminar, in a kind of academic sense, like in university. It's very difficult, sit and listen to a lecturer, take notes, go home, have your tea, think you've got it, because as other people have mentioned and discussed, the Western mindset is beset with difficulties. Of course, being in it, it's very difficult to see that one is in it. Someone who explained it very well is a guy that I've come across, a guy called Father Seraphim Rose. He was an Orthodox Christian monk in America, California, and he wrote some very interesting books and wrote about ideas kind of critiquing the Western mindset, much like Martin Heidegger did in regard to his ideas of forgetfulness of being. Seraphim Rose came at it from the angle of historically how the great schism within the Christian church and the development of certain aspects in Western culture, rationalism, scholasticism, etc., how these ways of thinking took us away from the roots of Christianity, the kind of true understanding of Christianity in some way, which gets into our thinking, takes us away from being. It's a very interesting idea. I think it deserves to be thought about if we're to be serious about thinking about being. So I'll read a little bit from his book. His book is called the Orthodox Survival Course, and he discusses this idea, if I can find it. Can't find it. Yes, here it is. Here it is. Right. Because it so happened, after destroying the outer universe with the philosophy of Hume and Berkeley and so forth, the philosophy, in order to find some foundation on which to base itself, finally settled on Kant, who said that all there is the individual, and I make my own universe. We don't know what the thing in itself is, what is out there, but I am the one who puts everything in order, and if I understand myself, I can make sense of the universe. But this amounts to very dangerous subjectivism, because in this system there is no room for truth anymore. There is just room for some kind of conventional view of things. And after him there came fantastic people, Fichte and Max Steiner and others, who said that there's nothing in the world but me, the I alone in the universe. And even after Steiner came to the point where he said, I am alone in the universe, trampling on the tomb of humanity, something to that effect, which is sort of the logical conclusion of people who realised thought from any kind of restraints and decided to find where they could think things through to. And when you think things through without any kind of traditional basis, you come to a dead end. Now, in this point, this idea I've discussed in several videos of the obsession of a technological attitude towards the mind and in mental health and in children's education, of dealing with problems of human existence, of one's being in the world. This idea that one is God, one is the master of one's house, so to speak. What Father Seraphim Rose is talking about here is that kind of way of thinking comes to a dead end. And he describes the Western mindset here, and I'll just read this little bit here. And now he speaks in particular of the West. It seems that the distinguishing feature of the Roman mind is precisely a conviction that outward rationalism outweighs the inward essence of things. Among all the features of the Roman man and all of the windings of his activities of intellect and soul, we see a common feature, that the outward order of his logical concepts was for him more than reality itself, and that the inward balance of his existence was known by him only in the balance of his rational conceptions or outward formal activity. This is highly pertinent to the idea and concepts inherent in a cognitive stroke technological way of seeing the mind, mental health, one's being and existence. Those concepts take us away from our inwardness of ourselves and who we are, our being, fundamentally. It distracts us, it takes us away. It takes us away for something essential, is what he's trying to get at. Both what Kierkegaard was getting at and Soren Kierkegaard, and are also perhaps not so much in the religious sense, but I believe he is hinting at that. Heidegger talks about this as getting away from being. And so, in this modern world in the 21st century, dominated by a technological view of mental health, that God is dead, and religion is under attack, the self or the I is king or queen, we're master of our own houses, we're constantly perhaps in danger of being taken away from ourselves. This inwardness that Seraphim Rose is getting at. Now, it might seem, what's the big deal? Is there a big deal? The whole basis of religious faith, I suppose, is this idea that Seraphim Rose is getting at. You know, to be the listener, as Kierkegaard talks about, one has to be there in being and not distracted, to be the listener of God. Now this is kind of getting supernatural now, I know. But you see, in Western thought, you know, everything seems to be okay in the world. But yet, is there a danger in seeing yourself as a technological machine, as the mind, as just some sort of cognitive thing that we listen to and do things to, and if we suffer we change it by thinking differently and things like that? Is it risk-free? Is it risk-free? Well, Seraphim Rose, Kierkegaard, Heidegger would argue not. You know? And so this conceptual world, the mental health concepts, the very kind of godless conceptualization of suffering, mental health, the self, the I. You know, do we get lost in empty, ambiguous ways of reasoning and thinking? Well, Martin Heidegger discusses this very concept in a section in Being in Time on ambiguity. He says, when in our everyday being with one another we encounter the sort of thing which is accessible to everyone and about which anyone can say anything, it soon becomes impossible to decide what is disclosed in a genuine understanding and what is not. This ambiguity extends not only to the world, but just as much to being with one another as such, and even to Dasein being there, Dasein's being toward itself, being there in the world towards oneself, the inwardness that Seraphim Rose is discussing. Everything looks as if it were generally understood. The commonly held concepts, technological concepts, generally taking hold of, generally spoken, though at bottom it is not. Or else it does not look so, and yet at bottom it is. Ambiguity not only affects the way we avail ourselves of what is accessible for use and enjoyment, and the way we manage it. Ambiguity has already established itself in the understanding as a potentiality for being, and the way Dasein, being there, projects itself and presents itself with possibilities. Everyone is acquainted with what is up for discussion and what occurs, and everyone discusses it. But everyone also knows already how to talk about what has to happen first, about what is not yet up for discussion, but really must be done. Already everyone has surmised and scented out in advance what others have also surmised and scented out. This being on the scent is of course based upon hearsay. For if anyone is generally on the scent of anything, he does not speak about it. And this is the most entangling way in which ambiguity presents Dasein's possibilities, so that they will already be stifled in their power. So in a kind of empty speech, a very habitual commonplace speech of concepts and technology, there's a way of speaking, a common kind of way of doing things, discussing things, like mental health, for example. There is an inkling in the air of there's something not being discussed. People can't put their finger on it in some way. They can't fathom what they're feeling is not right. There's an uncanniness about the world. Something unreal, strange is occurring. You know, you can feel this in psychiatric hospitals or in psychotherapy supervision groups when you're discussing patients or the ideas of mental health in jargon, in this conceptual technological way. There is an unrealness that permeates the air. People feel kind of inauthentic, a bit fake. People sense something but can't quite say what it is, what's going on. People get lost, they get burned out, they get trodden down with that. You know, in some ways they're fallen, People are become fallen from what Kierkegaard or Seraphim Rose discuss. They fall into what Kierkegaard might say is a kind of sinful state, because they're not accepting their inwardness. They're not listening to God. They're not you know, what Heidegger might say, we're being inauthentic to being. And so these are important points. In Kierkegaard's book, The Lily of the Field and the Bird of the Air, he talks about the idea of praying and listening to God. And I'll just read this little bit out. He talks about prayer. And then, if he in fact prayed truly fervently, and what happened to him? Something strange and wonderful happened to him. Gradually, as he became more and more fervent in prayer, he had less and less to say. And finally, he became entirely silent. He became silent. Indeed, he became what is, if possible, even more the opposite of talking than silence. He became a listener. He had thought that to pray was to talk. He learned that to pray is not only to keep silent, but to listen. And that is how it is. To pray is not to listen to oneself speak, but is to keep silent and to continue keeping silent, to wait until the person who prays hears God. That is why in serving as one's upbringing, the words of the gospel, seek first God's kingdom, muzzle a person's mouth, as it were, by answering every question he poses about whether this is what he shall do, with no, you shall first seek God's kingdom. And this is why one can paraphrase the gospel's words as follows: you shall begin by praying, not as though, as we have of course shown, prayer always begins with silence, but because when prayer has properly become prayer, it becomes silence. Seek first God's kingdom, that is, pray. If you were to ask indeed, if in your questioning you went through in every individual thing asking, is it this that I shall do, and if I do it, is this then seeking God's kingdom? The answer must be no. You shall first seek God's kingdom, but to pray, that is to pray rightly, is to become silent, and that is to seek first God's kingdom. He's pointing there away from the technological, away from the Western mindset that Seraphim Rose talks about, of this kind of rationalism, constant questioning, to do not put our trust in all these concepts, although helpful to a certain extent in some contexts, but in the most fundamental context of being, human being, existence and suffering, we must first become the listener and to pray right. Now, in relation to mental health world and children's education, this technological onslaught, the killing of God, we have to learn to listen again, perhaps. Much more to say about this, much more, but I wanted to put that out there because I was mulling over since the last video. It's something that has to be returned to because it's a practice in the Aristotelian sense of a practice for the sake of its own, just doing it rather than a process. And these are very, very important things to consider. But we've come to the end of today's little video, so thank you for all the subscriptions and views, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thanks again, take care.